Welcome to Triptych.
Three friends having a chat
about three artistic masterpieces.
Making connections for modern life.
Welcome to episode 7. Here we are. I can't believe it. Well, I say that every time, don't I? But we're here. Good to see you, Joel and Sophie.
Hey.
Good to see you too, guys.
So our opening gambit this week is guilty pleasures, by which I mean something that we are passionate about or love, but we know is just really uncool and quite embarrassing. So, Sophie, I have to start with you. What is your guilty pleasure?
It's Starlight Express, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical on roller skates.
Oh, my word.
It's not cool. I love a old school musical, which, you know, is light on plot, a lot of singing and dancing at random times. And Starlight Express, I think, encapsulates that the most. It's truly awful, but there's something in me that just wants to sing along when he starts singing, I am the starlight. I can achieve. And I'm like, yes, you can.
And of course, for those who don't know it, the whole point is that they're all trains and they've got heart, hence the roller skates.
They're trains on roller skates. There's people on roller skates pretending to be trains.
I feel like my life has been better from just not knowing this before this point in time. You know?
But here's the thing. Sophie likes it.
I can't help it.
Well, that's very honest of you. Joel, what about yours?
Yeah, so for me, the 2001 film Rat Race, I feel like I'm not supposed to like this film, but I blame it on watching it at 1 a.m. with friends for the first time. And we were on the floor, literally. I mean, it's a gag comedy slapstick. If I wanted excuses, I'd say, well, Ron Atkinson is in it. And he was actually speaking. And they made him into an Italian. It was very strange.
So just to clarify, have you watched this since?
I think I've watched parts of it since and enjoyed those parts and just been a little mortified at myself that I could actually watch it again and almost not wanting, you know, when you're torn between discovering that I really actually did like this and or hoping that you really didn't like it and it was just a moment. I've left that question unanswered because I'm just a little afraid to find out.
Okay, so mine is an album by, oh, dare I say it? Yeah, okay. It's Krista Burr, okay? Famous for The Lady in Red.
Oh, wow.
Which I hate as a song. It's an absolutely terrible song. This is long before when he was actually a pretty awesome and decent songwriter. And it's his 1975 album called Spanish Train and Other Stories. I just think it's amazing. But I think we should move on from that. I think that our first masterpiece this episode is probably our most controversial. It's one episode of the British TV series Black Mirror, created by the dark genius that is Charlie Brooker, who's come from satire, basically. He's a comedian, satirist, and he's been incredibly successful. It originally started on Channel 4 in the UK, then Netflix bought it up and have thrown gazillions of earth pounds at it. What is unusual about it is that each episode, with one or two exceptions, is standalone. So it's an anthology series rather than an accumulating narrative. And the episode we have in mind is called Men Against Fire. And it's the penultimate episode from series 3, came out in 2016. One of the things that, for our purposes, might be a bit controversial for some is that it's got some pretty graphic sex and violence in it. We will come to that. But also, it's talking about pretty dark things, so I won't do too much of plot spoiling, but the idea is that there are soldiers who have been given some kind of neural implant or something inside their brains that profoundly alters their perception and enables them to be controlled, manipulated somehow by the powers that be. One of the things that this does is that it reduces any reluctance or fear about killing so-called enemies. And in fact, it alters their perception of these enemies by making them seem subhuman or non-human. So the enemies in the episode are all called roaches, short for cockroaches. We discover as the episode goes on that actually they are not some alien species at all. They are human, but there are certain grounds that appear to be justifications for why they should be killed. We can come back to that. But the whole theme of this episode is the perception of enemies that is used and manipulated by people in power to make it easier to dismiss, to expel, to eradicate. And of course, there are resonances, particularly with 20th century history, at some of its darkest moments, not least things like the Holocaust. Now, it's not been the most popular episode in Black Mirror. There are others that are more beloved than this one, but this is quite interesting, and I think there is some topical resonance, even though we're nearly, almost 10 years since it was first aired. And of course, they're making new episodes even now, so it's an ongoing thing. So I know Sophie had seen it before, but I don't think Joel had. What did you make of it? Were you traumatized?
Yes. Yeah, this was my first episode of Black Mirror at all. For whatever reason, when it first came out, I kind of took note and just decided, no, I'm not going to get into that. So it was definitely a very thought-provoking and probably also just generally provoking episode. I thought the way they told the story was quite compelling because you're kind of discovering what's happening. You're with these soldiers. You're seeing things from their perspective. You're seeing this sort of the effect of this neural enhancement. And at first, what you think to yourself is, oh, this is making them more effective as soldiers. But as the story plays out and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, these aren't alien invaders.
Mm.
Oh, these are people who are sick. Oh, but wait, what is that? Oh, what's going on here? What does that mean? So I thought, yes, the storytelling was quite effective. Yeah, I mean, there are elements, I guess we'll get into that later, just, the violence, the nudity, that sort of thing, how they fit in the plot and in the storytelling. It definitely got me thinking about technology and the world we're living in and prejudice and how we can use power to tell the story we want to tell, to sort of build the world we want to build and justify that.
Yep. Sophie?
Well, I haven't seen that episode before. I've seen a couple of Black Mirror episodes. Is he a dark genius, or does he just tell Doctor Who stories with boobies for edge?
Fair question.
So I felt like it is a perennially relevant theme we're looking at. The idea that there is always attempts by people in power and by humans to demonize the other. We're always getting into our little tribes and being like, well, they're not like us, and so let's, treat them a certain way. So I thought it was a really interesting way of kind of seeing how that could be taken to more extremes. I reckon it was probably really groundbreaking in 2016 when it came out, but I think now with tech advances so much more, I actually guessed the twist within the first 10 minutes. But yeah, I was just like, oh, it's obviously the neural implants are changing how they're perceiving it, and they're not going to be bad people at all. It's just going to teach it. So I guessed it. But nevertheless, I thought it was, a really interesting way to look at that. I thought it was really interesting and relevant in the way that it's basically like a kind of genetic cleansing. These people, we're not told what is wrong with them. We're told that there's something in their blood or, something. So maybe disease. But for me, it really resonated with what's going on in America at the moment and recent attempts in the UK as well to kind of do a lot of fear mongering around autism and neurodivergence. There is a lot of that at the moment. And RFK Jr. calling in epidemic. It's not a disease. It's a lifelong neurological condition. But there's been a lot of fear mongering around it in the US and causing a lot of fear for autistic people. And there's been actually talks that they're going to produce this autism registry where they're wanting to go into everybody's medical records and make lists of who is diagnosed autistic.
Wow.
And when governments start making lists of people, it never goes anywhere good. So it felt really pertinent to me that these people in the episode are being targeted by some perceived genetic uncleanness, because that's what's happening right now with autism. And so I thought that was really, really good. You know, the use of women as well in the story. I mean, so the gratuitous boobies with Charlie Brooker, it really irritates me because I feel like they're wanting to show that women are just they're used in these dream sequences to kind of keep the soldiers happy, let's say, at night.
It's their kind of reward, isn't it, for killing people?
Yeah, it's their reward. They get these like really graphic sex dreams that they're given. And so that's really, really gross, but that makes a really good point about, you know, the use of women, the use of bodies and pleasure to kind of numb people and to kind of get them to do what you want. That makes a really good point. But it just really irritated me that they had such gratuitous booby shots because I'm like, you didn't need it. I could have gotten all that information without them. And I think especially knowing now, having so many actresses have come out and said that they hate doing nude scenes and they feel pressured into them. And often early in their career, they're like, I can't say no because they'll just get someone else. I'm a nobody. So like so many actresses have, like even famous ones have said, oh, I had to get drunk before filming that scene because it was too upsetting. And I'm like, So
Sophie, I think that's a really important point. But it's interesting, isn't it? So I'm not disputing that point at all. But the women in the rest of the narrative, there's a kind of flattening of genders, isn't there? Because basically this little platoon is commanded by a woman and there are other women in the team and there's sort of no distinction at all seems to be made. And they're all sleeping in the same dormitory. So it's like, well, gender is irrelevant at that level. Yeah. So it's a kind of strange mixed message on that front.
Yeah, I felt like the main female character, the soldier, but when you looked at how she behaved, almost like, wow, but she's just one of the guys. Did you sleep well last night? It's kind of like, how were your sex dreams last night?
Yeah,
you know, kind of thing. And it was, that was was strange.
Totally. It was like locker room talk, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. But locker room banter between this woman and this man. You know.
Yeah.
So just some of the characterizations were notable in that way, and like just very thought provoking.
I guess it's kind of like a sense of like we're at some point in the future and there's like kind of an equality of sorts in the sense that they're all doing the same job, but it kind of shows the amount of control they're under because they can all sleep in the same dorms, but they're completely under the control of their implant. So there is, you know, what they dream about is totally under control. So there's a kind of, a weird equality in the fact that they're all controlled massively. So,
So a flattening at different levels. I mean, a flattening of autonomy, a flattening of distinctiveness, a flattening of their humanity, which is ironic, isn't it? Because that's precisely what's happening to their perception of the other. So both have been obscured and they're dehumanized. They're not who they were, we would say, made to be.
The use of language and even race was interesting to me because, they're in this clearly, I guess, European country that these are probably American soldiers. They don't speak the language. They have this translator. That's not the difference that is almost being persecuted, being attacked. So we're crossing the language barrier. And then I thought it was very interesting that the lead character was a black male. Because again, there's so much history around prejudice towards based on race.
Right.
So here you have a platoon that's mixed race that is hunting these people, but what they've focused on is this genetic weakness, this disease. These people, if they continue to breed, kind of thing.
And I think they're all white, aren't they? All the roaches.
Oh yes. Which again was very interesting. And I guess it fits with some of the questions we are facing in a changing world in some ways as, what's going to be almost that new frontier of prejudice and difference. And yes, truth is it's probably changing. But I thought visually just seeing that, it was like, oh, that's interesting. You didn't go with the trope that could easily have gone with in terms of just prejudice and difference. This is a different space now we're dealing with.
What it made me think of actually was, what if COVID had been that little bit worse than it was and that it hadn't been overcome with vaccines? Basically what we're dealing with is the people who are infected and therefore a danger to everybody around them.
Yeah, we absolutely saw kind of the beginnings of that
Totally.
in COVID. People, we were taught to fear each other.
Yep.
Are you 6 meters away from me or 6 foot? Get back.
What was it?
I also found it interesting that
sorry.
something like that.
What?
Forget that.
One of our catchy slogans. Which...
Oh dear, we didn't have that one.
No, that was good.
What I thought was interesting is that the villagers don't have this neural implant, but they still refer to these other people as roaches, and it shows how much it impacts everybody when, the people in power decide this is the group that's going to be demonized, and the villagers go along with that. They're taught to fear. And that's what happened in COVID. We were all taught to fear each other.
Yeah, Sophie, I thought that was one of the most powerful moments when the soldier was kind of asking this woman who he now sees as a person, but why do the villagers respond to you the way they do? And she basically explains, basically all the propaganda has changed the way they see things.
The masterpiece I'm bringing to the table today is a favourite poem of mine. It's called Love After Love by Derek Walcott. That's Sir Derek, actually, I should clarify. So he was born in 1930 in St. Lucia, and he had a very humble start to life. His dad, Derek's dad, died when he was only 1 year old. His mom was like a seamstress and a teacher, but he felt compelled to write poetry. And he went on to win the 1992 Nobel Prize for Literature and many other accolades. So I love this poem. It's quite short, it's sweet, and it's a poem about returning to yourself. It's kind of the salvaging and the taking stock that happens after the end of maybe a hard relationship or a difficult relationship. And it's learning to kind of look at your life and at yourself with love and with gratitude.
Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life.
So I think it fits to kind of have the poem to be about the end of a romantic relationship. But I think the beauty of this poem is that it can be much wider than that. Because I think we all have these moments where we suddenly realize that we'd been adapting and changing ourselves for somebody else or for other people's expectations. And we kind of return and go, oh no, that's not who I am. I think it can be the end of friendship. It could be examining painful family relationships and how they've shaped you for better or for worse. Or for me, this poem I've carried with me a long time, and it really speaks to my experiences of church hurt and spiritual trauma and deconstruction and reconstruction, because it's a poem about returning after a period of self-abandonment when you've like squished yourself and you haven't loved or honored the self that God made you to be. So it opens with this line: the time will come when with elation you'll greet yourself arriving at your own front door. And it's this remembering parts of yourself and greeting them like old friends, and remembering things that you maybe hid to be accepted. I think many of us will have experienced that in relationships, that you've kind of toned bits of yourself down to be palatable. Or maybe you've stopped doing things that brought you joy because your personality and interests become subservient to the other person or to the group, like for church, for example, in exchange for acceptance. So for me, that's very much been church. I mean, I'm a follower of Jesus, but so often when I was a pastor's wife for 10 years, so often there were these strange cultural expectations and like performative aspects of what it meant to be a good Christian woman. And that really caused trouble for me when I couldn't conform. And so I started squishing myself. I started trying to make myself more palatable. And then when you have that realization that I'm I've kind of contorted myself, I'm not being who I'm supposed to be. And so then that line that comes that says, "You will love the stranger who was yourself," is deeply comforting, because all of us have been through those moments in a relationship or friendship. And it's telling you that you can reclaim these things about yourself again with joy. You know, you can rediscover these things. I find it interesting that it's got this religious imagery in it, where it has the give wine and give bread, kind of like a communion aspect. And then it goes on to say, "Give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who loved you." Now, I can imagine for some Christians or religious people who've got strong thoughts about, you know, self-denial and taking up one's cross and stuff, so saying something like that can feel dangerous or sacrilegious. I think, Mark, you mentioned the poem Love, is it number 3 by George Herbert? And that poem uses a lot of the more classic kind of language of unworthiness that we're more used to. But I don't think this poem, if it is a response, I don't think it's replacing that kind of sense of unworthiness for self-worship, or I don't think it's an egotistic thing. I think it's a self-compassion. I think it's a returning. For me, it was returning to me and honoring the person that God made me to be. It felt like a returning to the heart of God. So that sense of giving wine, giving bread, and giving back your heart is kind of thanking God for who he has made us to be. And I think many Christians seem terrified of self-knowledge, like it's going to lead down like this hubristic path, and we should be about self-denial. But I actually think, unless we take that seriously, the self-reflection, that will just lead to chronically repressed people who are reacting without understanding themselves. And then they have this kind of self-loathing, which is kind of wrapped up in religious terms. So I think I definitely had a form of like religious scrupulosity, which was like an OCD as a kid, where fear was definitely a main driver for me. So this idea of take down the love letters from your bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes, the idea of examining with compassion my flawed, mixed up life and learning to see me through the eyes of God has been very healing for me. So what did you guys think? Mark, what did you reckon?
I didn't know it before. I've known a sort of handful, probably count on one hand, of Walcott's poems, but I've been aware of him. It's fascinating. I didn't like it the first time I read it through and couldn't get my head into it. You know, like good art, very often it doesn't appeal or connect immediately. You need to work at it. And obviously having to be prepared to have something to say for this meant that I did work at it. I confess that I am quite lazy often with poetry, and if it doesn't grab me, I'm not very good at really diligently working at things. But I did with this, and then it really did reap rewards. I found it really moving and powerful. And I think what you've described, it hadn't occurred to me to put it in terms of, say, the trauma that I know you and I have talked about before, but that makes perfect sense. And the interesting thing is, just as you were saying about the George Herbert love, what I think is wonderful about Herbert's poem, yes, the guy is unworthy, but love in the person of Christ is absolutely insistent that he must come and sit and eat. And I think that's why I don't see this as a response or a rebuttal or anything of the sort. It's actually, this is somebody coming to terms again with the fact that they're already accepted. And that's what they need to persuade themselves about. So I found it a lovely, dovetail, if you like, with the Herbert.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Joel? How did you find it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, hearing your analysis of it and your relationship with it is fascinating. I think I'm probably still coming or find myself torn between my own Christian allergies for against just the idea of self-love and the whole
Yeah,
self-esteem
right.
movement, which I think took things to such an extreme that Mark, you talk about Herbert's poem, and even in you're sharing your own thoughts, Sophie. God is a reference point for how you see yourself, and I think there's a way we can be into ourselves which is unhelpful and has no reference point for recognizing what's good, what's not good. And I think I think much of my upbringing was just beware of that.
I mean,
But
same.
yeah, but I think, all right, just on the level of interacting with it as a poem, I mean, it's short, but the images are so powerful and fascinating. They really do draw you in. His use of the mirror is interesting to me. And each will smile at the other's welcome. It's like, well, obviously it's a mirror. So, the mirror can't do anything apart from reflect what it's seeing.
Yeah,
But the way he's turned you into two characters,
That's what I reckon with Christian upbringings who have because of maybe extremes in the self-love kind of movement, have such a fear of regarding oneself with compassion that we're actually walking around with a lot of self-loathing instead and thinking that is like religious behavior, thinking it's better to think less of myself. And I think I return to that book by Tim Keller, the thing of self-forgetfulness. I think we switch as Christians. We can be like, well, I can't think too well of myself, so I'll just think I'm a miserable worm who, and so much rather just to see ourselves through the eyes of God, accept that we are loved and we have that, moment to see ourselves in the eyes of divine love.
No, I'm glad you went there, because that's the other side of my relating to this, realizing that I think over time I have learned to see myself in healthy ways. And I'd make two other connections. I love that book by Keller. There's a well-known quote by John Calvin where he says, nearly all the wisdom we possess, that is to say, true unsound wisdom, consists of two parts: the knowledge of God and of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so there is this relationship that's happening as we get to know ourselves in a relationship with God, and we're getting to know God and seeing ourselves clearly, that Calvin is hitting on, which sounds paradoxical, but really works in practice. But in the other,
sure.
I would just the other reflection on this is Andrew Peterson's "Be Kind to Yourself." I remember just being very affected by that song, and just the way he says you got to learn to love your enemies too. Just even in that self-loathing,
exactly.
that journey of I do recognize something's broken in me. I don't like it, and he's like, yeah, you have to learn to love your enemies too. That for me, I think it intersects with what we're talking about here. That same world of there is a self we learn to love, and there's a way we have to learn to see ourselves also. I love the give wine, give bread, just as an image of fellowship and acceptance. I find it fascinating that he's using it in that way, but I think it works so well. Yeah, it's. I think you highlight, Sophie, just the sides of this where you can get towards self-loathing, where you can get towards this blanket self-acceptance, which is not actually aware of self.
Yeah, that's not aware either. It's that kind of coming to terms with the full nature of who we are, our dark side and our light side, and being able to view it with a sense of kind of curiosity and compassion rather than just like, put it in a box. I can't cope with looking at that part of myself. That's, rather than being like, no, that's who I am as a person. And actually, God does love me and is doing something.
I was just thinking that what makes the difference is having that external reference point in our creator, because that relativizes us. I am not the center of the universe. I am not the captain of my soul or the master of my fate. I'm not. There is a God who made me, to whom I am dependent, on whom I'm dependent, and to whom I should be loyal. And the thing is, I guess what disturbed me on the first reading, or first couple of readings, was I didn't really get a sense of that. And it felt like a L'Oreal advert, because I'm worth it.
Right.
That's what I love. It feels dangerous on first reading to somebody who's not accustomed to that. It feels it, all your spidey senses.
Yeah, but this is not a flouncy poem, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, no, exactly. On first reading, it feels dangerous. It feels like, oh, what is this? What is this love fest? but actually it's really affecting and beautiful about coming to terms with oneself and receiving it with gratitude, you know?
And what the layer I'd add is this. Now that as I pass to people, one of the things I've noticed is that the generation that's a little bit younger than me, they actually don't like time with themselves.
Absolutely.
We're in this age of distraction, but a lot of them like it. They want it. They're very uncomfortable to sit with their own thoughts. So one of the challenges I think in this poem is just that challenge to sit here, to eat, just that to feast on your own life. And as you say, Mark, I think that's the key. If that becomes self-referencing, we're going to be in trouble. But I think with the light of the knowledge of our Creator, with a sense of there are things that are broken about me, but I can face them. So you put Herbert alongside this, and I do think there's a place of health we can reach that's avoiding the extremes. My masterpiece this time, to add to what's already quite an interesting palette, is a song by the band Lake Street Dive. It's called Making Do. Well, let me start with the band itself, Lake Street Dive. I got introduced to Lake Street Dive actually through a Rabbit Room newsletter. Somebody was just pointing out some songs they liked, and they had done a bunch of covers that I started listening and thought, oh, this is really cool. I like this band. I like their sound. Let me look for just their own original songs, and kind of stumbled across Making Do. And admittedly, the sarcasm it starts with, I was drawn in immediately. I've had a long love affair with sarcasm, and just still trying to learn to use it well, use my powers for good, kind of thing. So I was pulled in by the first lines, which are, to the next generation, Merry Christmas. You're working harder than ever now, and the coffee sucks. I was like, ooh, I'm very interested in this song all of a sudden. A little bit more about the band. So they're all classically trained. They formed at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. They've had a little bit of rotation of members over the years, but the core is still there. They mix genres and do it quite well, I think. They focused a lot on just making music for people to enjoy. But as they developed, they started bringing a bit more of their views, their politics into their music, which I think is going to be a good discussion point for us, because this song is really written from the perspective of the drummer, who's a self-proclaimed environmentalist. He wrote the song. His name is Mike Calabrese. And speaking about it, he says, look, I'm trying not to be preachy here, but I'm trying to say how I feel. So I guess we can figure out, did he pull that off? Did he end up being preachy, or did he actually just express this well? And Mark, we've had discussions about art versus propaganda. Especially when you get into this space of environmentalism, it has so much edge to it. I mean, you think immediately my mind goes to the Stop Oil Now folks who are just getting arrested in the UK and just go to the extremes to make their views known. And then, of course, from a Christian perspective, I was sharing the other day at church, we're preaching through Genesis, and I was sharing that, hey, growing up, faith and environmentalism didn't seem to be good bedfellows, because, it just felt like, well, they're all kind of fanatics, and God's going to destroy the world anyway. Why should we care? Kind of thing.
Whoa!
Hey, no, I fleshed this out really well too. Anyway, we might get back there. So Making Do, as the song progresses, I think they use really, really good images. It fits in part because of the sarcastic edge to it. I think he's able to say things and you're able to process them, that if the song were too kind of plaintive, this is not Michael Jackson's Heal the World that's going on here. This does feel like a very personal reflection on just how this writer and how this band feels about what's happening. What particularly tugs on my heartstrings, I think, is as the song progresses, the relationship with his daughter is now revealed. And a part of his concern now is, what kind of world am I leaving my daughter? He talks about just how, when he talks about the song, he talks about how having a child started to change his perspective from this very self-involved, I'm just doing what I'm doing, to, wait a minute, there's somebody who's coming after me who's going to have to experience this world, and what do I want it to be like for them? I find it to be an enjoyable song, yet provocative at the same time. So I don't know what you guys thought. I mean, I kind of just threw this one at you. Maybe Mark, you can jump in first.
Again, I didn't like it to begin with, not so much because I objected to what it was saying, but more because it just didn't really grab me musically. It sounded deceptively, and I say that advisedly, deceptively middle of the road to begin with. And I thought, oh, okay, this is an odd choice. What's Joel on now? And which is a question I often find myself asking. But
I think we all felt like that this week. This time
Yes,
around.
I think we all did.
What's going on with these choices? Is this end of season fatigue?
I think we're getting there.
Totally.
And it was one of those classic things that I didn't really pay attention to the words at all first time. And how it just reminds me so often, when we hear stuff on the radio or whatever, it's just the vibe we're receiving and getting that we respond to. And if the vibe doesn't grab you, then you don't follow up and perhaps check out the lyrics. But again, because I was, being a good boy and doing my prep, I thought, I suppose I better read the lyrics. And I read them. I thought, whoa, okay, this is interesting. So then I listened to it again with the lyrics in front of me and I thought, gosh, there's a lot going on here. And there seemed a bit of a disconnect between the lyrics and the music. But actually, I got to the conclusion in the end that no, it was quite canny, because there's a hook to the music that gets you in and you start sort of going with it, but with these words that are really in your face. And I think it's a good question. Is it preachy? I don't know. It's full on, that's for sure.
That's interesting that you're talking about the sarcasm and the kind of the vibe of it. To me, it felt like it's kind of coated in a kind of slightly ironic, apathetic irony. So to me, I see what he's doing there, and I think that's a good device to try and stop it from being too preachy or too self-regarding, like a kind of Michael Jackson Heal the World or Earth Song or something. But then I think it maybe runs the kind of risk of just sounding slightly resigned and a bit like, well, I know what we should be doing, and you suckers just ruining it for me. So it feels a bit apathetic in the sense that it's just like, to the next generation, Merry Christmas. That's funny, but it's also just like, well, Merry Christmas. What are you gonna do? We've ruined it now, guys. So I don't know how well that worked in terms of getting me engaged with the themes. But the lyrics are really good. That really resonates, that whole bit when it's just like everybody knew, reading all the same headlines, blowing through the traffic signs, looking for the cops. But what could you do? That really resonated with that sense, which I think they capture of kind of, it's not quite apathy, but it's a kind of resigned, what can I do? What am I supposed to do?
There's particular resonance with that line, shooting for the moon shots, because it was, what was it, just last week we had the Jeff Bezos rocket with Katy Perry and co. for their 11 minutes. That is so absurd. And I mean, I have no idea how you calculate the environmental consequences of just those 11 minutes, but it's just like, for some, there's just pure hedonism with consequences for everybody else that hardly bear thinking about. But it's the overall tone of just not so much apathy, but just resignation and just helplessness.
Yeah, it's kind of resignation, isn't it? Which
is weird, because I feel that in some ways, yet I feel like at the same time they're saying, but I'm really passionate about this. This is something I care about. But it's this, I think the sarcasm coats it and makes it a little bit more palatable to, I mean, again, some of these lines, if they're received a different way, could sound really alarmist. When you're talking about killer waves and riots coming to the coastline soon, counting up the new typhoons quicker than kilowatt, it helps me to think a bit about just the power of music and genre and what it does to you. Because I think you mount that in a very different way, and it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But, your head is bobbing, and you're thinking, oh, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, typhoons. It's like, okay, yes.
Riots.
Riots, yeah. I think we are all at the point where we're realizing, okay, there are real threats here that we're facing. I mean, for me, living on an island, thankfully an island with much altitude, and hearing the dialogue in just the kind of first world, and you realize, okay, we have some bad practices. We know that, but what we contribute to the overall problem is so small.
Yes.
So for me, I didn't read apathy as much as helplessness.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a better word, to be honest.
Yeah, just kind of like all right, I want to do something. What can I do? How much does it make a difference? And I felt that wrestling with, all right, this could be really bad, but what do we do anyway?
And of course, we're on a bigger island, and it's interesting that whenever you see maps of rising sea levels and what is left of Britain with only a certain rise. So basically, the whole region where my parents live and I grew up in East Anglia, that's gone. There is hardly any Norfolk and Suffolk left.
Yeah, I was going to say Norfolk's gone, man.
Some would say quite right too, but I wouldn't be one of them.
That kind of matched my own sense of kind of helplessness, in the sense that, I think many of us do all the good practices in terms of, like, we do the recycling and we try and make some good choices. But in the kind of face of billionaires doing their little trips to space for like promo and the huge conglomerates, it's like a drop in a bucket what we're doing. So it's so hard to know. I kind of like the compassion they have for ourselves. It's like living with your eyes shut, because we're like, sometimes we have to just shut it out. But they're like, I guess it's hard to be a human, which I'm like, it has compassion. But then it's that really funny line, but it's even harder to be not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, we've got to do something, guys. Otherwise, we're not going to be here.
Just from a songwriting quality, I think there's so many good turns of phrase.
Yes, that was a great one.
One of the things that Cabresi says about the song is that they wanted to feel like we could generate conversation about this.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.
And I think they do that well, even in terms of, okay, is this apathy? Is this helplessness? Is this passion? I think that in and of itself is conversation. So I think they've done a good job with their art of just putting this on the table in a way that doesn't make you recoil entirely, but gets you thinking and talking about it. One of the things that I think, the thing that hooked me with this song is late down in the song, in the bridge, you got to make it do a lot more than ever. And you don't even know what you've lost. A perfect paradise of too many guilty pleasures, and you pay the cost. You pay the cost. As a Christian, I'm fascinated by the theme that often comes out in a lot of the space of discussion here, that we had this perfect world. Like, where does that really come from in people's minds, that the world was perfect and we have messed it up? On one hand, it feels like, okay, I think we're overestimating our own power. On the other hand, you realize that, no, but we would always have a relationship with the environment that's going to affect what the environment is like. That kind of Edenic relic in people's minds, that we were given almost this wonderful world, and what are we going to do with it? That fascinates me.
And basically the problem is, we listen to Christopher, Starlight Express, and we watch Rat Race. Those are the guilty pleasures that have ruined this perfect paradise.
Yes.
Dare you throw that in our faces?
Because, all of that video watching, there's an environmental cost to that.
We've had quite a complicated time so far. We've had 2 masterpieces about mirrors and 2 about environmental and technological doom. We've had trauma and self-loathing. Where do we go from here? I mean, it's all looking a bit grim, if you ask me.
Looking at just how artists express themselves in the Charlie Brooker and in Making Do is interesting to me, because both are coming from, it seems, places of concern about where the world is going. Brooker, obviously, just in his own dark way, is flagging real issues about who we are as human beings and the power of technology if we wield it in the wrong ways. If we wield it in ways that just to empower us to hate and to destroy each other. And in Making Do, it feels like a lament, as we've talked it through, lament in terms of how unthinkingly we've done so much damage to the environment and what the consequences will be. The irony to me, I mean, if I can just jump back to it very briefly, is like the whole coffee industry to me is like, come on, guys, why are we doing this in the first place? Trying to get coffee all over the world, and making everybody love this thing. But yeah, so we've had our indulgences, and no, we're lamenting the cost of that. And just to see 2 very contrasting pieces of art thinking about where we are, our journey, the consequences of our development was interesting to me.
So could you say that one of the threads might be living with unintended consequences.
Yeah, and I think, how do we help each other to consider that? Because the truth is, again, we've talked about this before in the podcast. We live at pace. We're making decisions all the time. We're using the tools in front of us to pursue the ends we want, and we're not necessarily thinking about the bigger picture and what's happening in the world and the kind of world we're building. And we can live out of our fears a lot of the time. As an individual doing that, you don't tend to think, well, that's going to make a big difference. But then when the powers that be start to push that in a certain direction, as we're seeing in the world right now, we realize, oh my goodness, decisions really do matter and will shape the future. They shape how we think about each other. You know, we were talking earlier about COVID and the fear we generated towards one another, where everyone kind of became a threat, and you just keep to yourself, you keep to your family, and how quickly that happened, how quickly we all just fell into that. In many ways, we didn't understand the threat, we didn't understand what we were dealing with. But yeah, just I think that seeing the place of art in asking us hard questions, to challenge the trajectory we're on, to think about the world we live in. I think, you know, I think we saw that in both of these pieces.
Yeah, I was kind of making the connection that with Black Mirror and Lake Street Dive, we're looking at the consequences of technology and how we have treated our world, the people in it, and what happens when when that continues. And so we're looking at the kind of fast pace of life that has driven us to this place in Black Mirror, where they've got the tech advances, which ostensibly they're wanting it to be to help veterans not have PTSD. So that's why they're having an implant to help them kill people better. But obviously that's dehumanizing people. And then in Lake Street Dive, we've got, this environmental theme and seeing the kind of ruin we've brought to the world by our actions. And then I think it's interesting that you were mentioning, Joel, when we were discussing my poem, that when you're pastoring young people, that they don't like to slow down or be alone with their thoughts. And so I kind of see the poem Love After Love as a kind of like antidote to the problems that we see in the others, that it's precisely that kind of slowing down, that taking stock, that coming to terms of the fullness of who we are, both the good and the bad, and accepting that. And the kind of the practices that are happening in Love After Love, it's an embodied thing. You're talking about going to a house, looking at yourself, sitting, eating. These are really embodied things. It slows us down. So I kind of think the poem acts as an antidote to those things.
It's interesting, though, that it's needed. And I wonder whether in each of the three, there are unintended consequences of things that are done perhaps with good intentions. So even the whole shadowy, nameless government or whatever it is in the Black Mirror episode that has decided that these people need to be killed for the sake of preserving the health of those who are not infected or whatever it is, however flawed, that is well-intentioned, you presume. I mean, obviously there are going to be some people who are not well-intentioned and do it because they're psychopaths, but that doesn't seem to be the case here.
Or they've got shares in the tech company.
Well, that's true. But not everybody who has caused environmental degradation has done so with sort of alacrity and joy. They thought that they were actually lifting people out of poverty. They thought that they were building infrastructure for societies that have been completely squashed globally and lived in poverty, and their health records were terrible and stuff. All of these things, you can see there are benefits to society, but people just didn't have a clue of how serious it was all going to be. So again, you have those unintended consequences. And then in the poem, you mentioned about the idea of people assuming that in order to show humility and godliness, as well as a desire to serve other people, let's give it the best possible spin on it. You think it's my duty to love other people. That means squashing myself unhelpfully. I don't think all repression is necessarily wrong. I think there are a lot of things that we're very glad do get repressed. But the point is that...
But I think acknowledgement is the good thing.
Yeah. And so these unintended consequences of thinking that's the way to do it well, being in the end very detrimental. This is taking the next step, which the other two don't do. So what marks the poem out is it's starting from a similar place, but it goes on and says, okay, so this is how we can begin to rectify the situation.
And I think it's interesting that, Joel, you're talking about, people making decisions based out of kind of fears as well. And that happens in Black Mirror. We see people living out of fear of the other. And then in the poem, I think, it really speaks to people who have spent some time, again, maybe unintentionally, living with fear as their main motivator. Fear of not being accepted in the group or not being enough for their partner or things like that. And it's kind of fear which is motivating their decisions. So it's not love, but it's fear. And then when they start to return to themselves, it's that sense of understanding that, love is the more powerful motivator for change.
Yet, as you say, it feels like an invitation and expression that's fraught with peril because of how we can twist it. And I guess it feels similar when you open up a conversation about environmentalism and that sort of thing, because it's like, okay, this could go in some really unhelpful directions.
Right.
This is a conversation that needs to be had. But wow, yeah. Just like, how do we navigate this well and get the best out of this? And I feel like you did that well with the poem, just kind of realizing, oh, but yes, there is a context in which this really does serve. And there are people who need to hear this, people who need to think about it, think about just some of the ways they've lived their life kind of on the run from themselves in hopes of finding love in relationships with others. But really, that's not going to work well without there being a sense of self and I think a clear view of strengths and weaknesses. But I guess I do bring something to the table and I can actually enjoy time with myself,
Yeah, absolutely. And as Mark said, often these things are with good intention, especially with so many Christians. They truly want to please and honor God, but they kind of go about it in a way that, they kind of pour themselves out to the point of burnout because they're not listening to their body saying you can't do all of these things, but they're like, but I must because I want to serve these other people, and then end up damaging their families because then they completely burn out. And so often it's just so good intentions, but it's this fear of self and self-reflection that gets in the way.
Yeah. One other just collision that I think is interesting is in Black Mirror, as dark as it is, you realize that the motivation that the authorities have is creating a better world. Creating this, it's almost this. It is a quest for paradise. To say, if we can get rid of these people who bring these weaknesses, these diseases, and it's not even diseases, it's what we see as flaws. We can eliminate the people who can perpetuate the flaws. Then, whatever price we pay, that's okay.
That's how these systems kind of flourish because they couch these things as a benefit.
Right.
I mean, I think about the autism registry. People are thinking that that's a benefit in the same way that screening for Down syndrome is seen as a benefit. But the consequences for that are the death of so many Down syndrome babies who just aren't brought into the world.
Yeah.
So again, it's couched in benefit terms. And we're trying to, as we see, make a better world. But often it has these horrible consequences.
And actually the benefit is quite a reductionist thing, isn't it? Because the benefit is usually economic and not social or human or relational or any of that, because actually in the end, that doesn't count.
That alongside the yearning for paradise, in making do and wishing that, wishing we could be more conscientious, wishing we could make better choices, recognizing that we are on a journey and we're going really fast and we're struggling to slow down and think this through. It's fascinating to me how even that yearning for paradise can be misguided, just funneled in some very destructive directions.
It's a kind of cliche now, isn't it? That the desire to build paradise on earth results in building a hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically. And I think the poem does, speak powerfully to ways of coming to kind of grips with ourselves as humans and being able to understand the good and the bad in ourselves. And it's only from that place of full acknowledgement and understanding that you can start to kind of make choices which are going to be better.
I'm a bit depressed now.
Oh, no.
That's not good.
Okay, help me out.
One thought I have is we do live in a world where it's important to have art that is provocative, that does challenge us, that does kind of poke us out of complacency. It doesn't always leave us with all the answers, but I think it can help to make us a bit more aware and a bit more thoughtful. And I think that's what I'm leaving with from all of these pieces, that, okay, yeah, as uncomfortable as it can be, opening your eyes and walking around is probably better than keeping them closed and walking around. Yeah, I think I'm appreciative of the power of art, and I think the responsibility of artists to provoke us.
And actually, it shows that great art doesn't have to be beautiful. I mean, I think that's a blind alley that sometimes people go down, that actually they're only looking for things that are beautiful. And actually, that can be dangerous, because it can be a way of shielding yourself from the ugly. And some of the stuff we've been looking at today is pretty ugly and brutal, but that doesn't stop it being good art.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think each of them has made us all uncomfortable in different ways, very much. And I think that is so good, because discomfort or anger or annoyance is such a good tool to kind of ask the questions, well, why is that making me feel that way?
Yeah.
And trying to open up that discussion. I think, when we're just all agreeing and thinking, hey, that's nice, it's awesome. But I think feeling disturbed by art is such a valuable tool to really throw open your own biases and the way you see the world and go, well, why does that bother me? Why is that triggering me? What am I holding dear that making me go, oh no? I think it's just a really excellent tool to do that.
Well, that's great, because I think that end note of disturbance is entirely appropriate after the discussion we've had. So that's goodbye from me.
That is goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
That was Triptych, hosted by me, Mark Minnell, with Joel Bain in Jamaica and Sophie Killingley in the UK, with tech and editorial expertise from Owen Feetham. Visit our website at triptychpod.com, that is triptychpod.com, for episode show notes, background information and various links. Please do get in touch with any questions, comments and even suggestions for future episodes. And if you've enjoyed this, please do share it around and rate us wherever you get your podcasts.